Hello and welcome. My name is Carolyn Roberts. I belong to the Squamish Nation Indian Band up in North Vancouver. My birth mother, Janet Baker, comes from the Thafarge family in Naquaqua up in Anderson Lake. My birth father comes from the Stolo territory of Chilliwack from the Shiactin Nation. I'm telling you this story today about the history of St. Mary's Residential School because this is where my birth mother was taken. She was taken from her family and her home up at Anderson Lake and taken to the school. And I want to talk to you today about the land and what is there today and what is missing about what's there today and about what has happened on that land and the history of that land. This is what St. Mary's looked like when my birth mother went there. My birth mother and her 4 siblings went to St. Mary's Residential School. My grandmother spoke 5 indigenous languages of our territories. My birth mother speaks none. While she attended this school, she witnessed other children being abused. She was also abused herself. She was taught that she was a heathen and that it was not okay for her to speak her language and be who she was as an indigenous person. This school and the people who taught at this school stripped that of my mother and myself because of that. So I want to talk to you about what the park is like today. Today, if you go to Heritage Park, this is what you see. Celebrations. The chapel's still there. And of course, they celebrate Canada Day every year in this park. Concerts, people walking the dogs, people playing with their children. This all happens at this beautiful, scenic area. But what's the story? What is missing from the story? I can tell you what's missing. The history.
I came up from Queensborough with 12 native paddlers in a war canoe, and as we rounded the bend in the Fraser, I made up my mind that I would build my mission on this beautiful hillside. I inspected it and made sure there was a nice creek for water and a level spot for buildings, and I and the natives cooked our dinner on the beach at the mouth of the creek. I told the natives that I was going to take this place and build a school for them, and also a church. Leon Fouquet, Oblates of Mary Immaculate, summer 1861.
So, what I thought I'd do for you today is take you on a field trip to St. Mary's. I brought with me a couple of friends so that you could see through their eyes and through my eyes what it looks like today. What I hope you gain from this is when you are out on the land and at the places that you go visit, what's missing from that story? I want you to come away from this being more curious, and wondering how we can change the stories that are being lost upon this land, and how you can be an advocate for change. How are we going to change the stories that have been put in front of us? The story before this story. Enjoy the journey.
Hello, I'm Dylan.
I'm Dana. I'm his wife. I'm tagging along on this field trip to the site of St. Mary's Residential School.
Yeah, and we're here talking about our feelings at the opening arch, the entranceway to the Fraser River Heritage Park, as it is now called, where there is at the site of the residential school, and kind of gathering our feelings about how we feel about the documentation of what this place was or how it's presented today.
And we're both super white.
Yes, we are. It appears that they have any mention. They don't discuss why there are Indigenous kids in that picture.
Well, none of the pictures say what
No,
they're from.
None of them do.
What does it ask you to go look at?
It says that we invite you to stop at many stations and storyboards that you will see throughout the area. Each of these stations provides a memorial bench and a storyboard which highlights one or more interesting features about the park. Okay.
Interesting feature about the park?
Yeah, about the park. Yeah.
Do you mean the place where the residential school used to be?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Yeah.
But it doesn't say anything about that on it.
It doesn't say anything about that here. Fraser River Heritage Park.
So I did some digging and some searching to find out how long they've been celebrating Canada Day at St. Mary's Residential School, or today they call it Heritage Park. They have these massive celebrations of people coming together to celebrate the birthday of Canada, of Confederation. So they've been doing it since 1990. What I find most interesting is behind where this fellow is doing the puppet show. This is where the boys' dormitory was. The boys' dormitory is where they were sexually abused and beaten. And they have a puppet show happening right in front of it. They have all these games and things for all the children to enjoy, and all the kids being there for face painting and celebrating of Canada Day. Just a couple steps away from places where Indigenous children were raped, beaten, and abused on a daily basis. Does this seem okay?
This is an old image of the residential school here, and there's a heritage walk that you can take, which takes you to the, let's see here. It looks like some of these pieces are planned pieces that don't exist. This looks to be an image of what the residential school would have looked like originally, and you can go to
The boys' dormitory,
okay.
girls' dormitory, the cemetery. The gymnasium,
Yep.
and the agricultural building.
Yeah.
So these were all parts of the school.
But
I don't think the memorial bandstand was.
No, and it is interesting that this does not talk about, this was a residential school. This talks about there's a heritage walk and there's a boys' dormitory here. Let's not talk about why there was.
Yeah.
There's a plaque at the beginning which talked a little bit about this being a site of a residential school, but it does not seem adequate to simply provide that information and not
Especially if you don't know what that means.
Yeah.
Oh, school, how nice.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
So this particular one was the second version of the school. The first version of the school, when the missionaries first came, and it was Catholic missionaries that came, was down by the railroad, and then they moved up the hill to where this is, where this picture was.
That's right.
And then they closed this in 1961. And they moved it down, so there's a third version of the school, which is now on the reserve territory of the Stolo. It was given back to the Stolo people in 2005. So this is just the second version.
Yeah.
And the girls' dormitory was right here. This is where my mother went, and my aunt, and then all of my uncles went to the boys' dormitory, which was there. Okay.
So this plaque has 2011 on its date, so it's still not incredibly modern, but is still lacking any information about what this place is, what this place was.
But it's a pretty map.
It's a pretty map.
And look, here's a person with a child and bunnies. They're happy.
Yeah.
But here, so all these yellow ones here, these are all parts of what the residential school was, but it doesn't say
it lists them as heritage foundations.
Yeah. So,
Oh
which
boy. This is a bad plaque. This one should get removed too.
Mission's historical past.
For millennia before European people arrived in the Fraser Valley, you might have seen a well-developed Aboriginal culture doting the... Oh man, I can't even. Ay, ay, ay. Okay.
you might have seen that until they took them away. So again, single-sided story, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is that if you didn't know anything about the history and you didn't know what this place was, this is what it'd be telling you. And nothing stands out so far that it was a residential school and what that history entails.
This also really reminds me of what we've talked about the narrative of Indigenous people who used to live in British Columbia. They were here, and now they're gone.
Now they're gone. Where'd they go?
Right?
Well, and that's what they want you to believe, because then they don't have anything to fight about, because they don't exist without the feathers and the teepees. Oh, wait a minute, that's not us. That's the Prairie Kids. So far along our journey, we've seen a bunch of plaques that don't tell us anything, that don't recognize the importance of this place. So how are we supposed to get a different perspective and another point of view when we're not told the whole story of what this place is and was? How do we ask people to change their ideas about a place that they love to come, to celebrate, to be with their friends and to be with their families? How do we ask them to do that when they don't know the story behind the place that they are going to? How does this happen? So as we continued on throughout the park, we came across this beautiful rhododendron garden. And it was a plaque that was dedicated to a doctor who had donated a whole bunch of rhododendrons for the park. And as we noticed and walked around, we saw that there was foundations for the girls' dorm, the boys' dorm, for the people who worked there's dorm, the gymnasium, and all of these other buildings. But what we noticed was that there was no foundation for where the actual school was. It was now being covered up by this beautiful rhododendron garden, as if to say we have completely wiped out the school itself because not even the foundation was there any longer. Will they be too horrified, or is it too much of a discomfort for them to admit the truth that they've erased?
Yeah, I suppose maybe that's a better way of describing it. I think it's a discomfort entirely. I think that this place, as we've seen today, people come here, and green space is important to suburban communities, right? So people must love having access to this green space.
Right.
If they felt this uncomfortable coming here,
Then people wouldn't come here.
well,
So do you think that they would actually then in able to honor the indigenous people of this land if they were to actually create an actual memorial like the Holocaust memorials? Would they even allow that?
yeah.
Because this is the largest space in Mission for them to have their celebrations.
I really don't think that, yeah, how to parse my thoughts. I think that this place has been, it's had such a long life as a celebration space that the city has to kind of decide probably whether they want to change at all or whether they want to change quickly or whether there's going to be a long, slow change. Who knows? But clearly it's a source of revenue for the city as well.
Yeah.
Right?
People get married here up on the hill.
Marriages cost money.
Yeah, and they take pictures here. So when we're talking about people getting married here, let's take a look at these people are getting married under the memorial of the bell from the residential school. Yes, it's a beautiful piece of artwork here. But the bell is to remind people of the residential school that was there. And behind this bell, again, is the boys' dormitory. So just on the other side of those lovely people getting married is a place where Indigenous children were beaten, raped, and killed. Let's get married there. This doesn't make any sense. And moving on to the more horrifying pictures, these people thought it was appropriate to take a picture inside the down area of the foundation for the girls. Right here, this is where the girls' dormitory was. They think it's a beautiful place for a picture, where girls were raped and abused and beaten. This seems okay, right? What a beautiful way to remember your wedding day. And I think that this picture, out of all of the pictures that I Googled and found online for wedding pictures at Heritage Park, this one simply has to be the most horrifying picture that I found. This little girl is trying to open the gate to the cemetery. The cemetery where children are buried. Children that died at the hands of the people who operated the school. What a beautiful picture this is of their little girl trying to get into the graveyard. This makes no sense.
I think that there's got to be a possibility for this space to commemorate and honor what happened here, and for it to and for it to still be a place where people can at least spend time out in nature as it is here.
Mm-hmm.
But the question is whether the people who manage places like this are going to trust people to do that, right? If they're going to think, well, if we put a memorial up, nobody will come. And I don't think that's true, but I can understand people being afraid of that, or perhaps being uncomfortable with that.
So then what's the problem with the discomfort?
The discomfort for me is a part of it is just the colonial entitlement, right? Like, we want to come to a place and not have to think about what it was. I mean, even if you go to Bray Island or Derby Reach or any other green space in the Lower Mainland, it's all Indigenous territory.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, like, there might not have been residential schools there, but if you really consider the heritage of the territory, there's an amount of guilt that goes into visiting any of those green spaces. Mm-hmm. I do think that there's an importance to commemorate what this place was, and I think the community would appreciate if it was done in a way that they feel they could still enjoy this space. I just don't know if that's something they should be entitled to.
Well, and so for me, this particular space is a place where my mom, we lost her. She was raped. She was told that she was a heathen. She got stripped of her language and her culture in that space right there. And they want to talk about entitlement to the space.
Yeah.
Gets lost on me. After we move away from the girls' dormitory, we then come closer to the cemetery, and we find another plaque. So now we're at the cemetery, at the Pioneer Cemetery.
We both saw this plaque and couldn't help but laugh a little bit. I think because you come around the corner and you think, here's going to be a plaque talking about the history of this place, and it's a plaque about the Pioneer Cemetery.
Look, and that's where the schools are. Look at that's the girls' dormitory.
Can we talk about this first sentence?
Yeah.
When the site for the St. Mary's Mission was chosen in 1861, the land was sparsely populated wilderness.
Right?
It has served the burial needs of fathers, the pioneer families of the area, and many First Nations families. Now, why would this cemetery serve their needs?
And why wouldn't it tell what it was?
Why wouldn't it talk about which members of the family are buried here?
Right? Something else that we noticed was the staff housing place was a beautiful spot that was surrounded in flowers and trees, and you could go and you could sit there and ponder and reflect on the park and the history of the park in this beautiful place where the staff housing was, and this made us wonder, why is that one decorated and the other ones are left empty and vacant?
There are places here like this foundation behind us of, I think this is the boys.
This is the boys?
The boys' dormitory, where you can see the foundations very clearly here. I think of any place, of any one of these foundations, I think the staff foundation should not be memorialized or made beautiful, and should be left as an artifact, as like, yes, this is what this place was. You can see the foundations of it, and this is what happened here.
So Dana did ask me about what I thought would be appropriate, and I think that within that spot we should put the names of all the staff that work here, because out of all the 28,000 or some odd staff that worked for residential schools, nobody's been convicted of any harm or wrongdoing on children. So I think that we should put their names there, and the names of all the children that passed away, and a reason why we need to know both of them.
One thing I think is interesting is that these trees are not young trees, these trees in the memorial garden here. Clearly this place has been designed for use for the past 30 or 40 or more years. And I do think it's challenging if people came in and ripped these trees down and ripped the memorial garden out. I think maybe a lot of people would wonder why, and would be upset.
Upset, yeah.
Well, maybe they should be. Maybe they should be upset that there's a garden there in the first place. But
Right?
I guess I could understand why the city of Mission would be loath to make a big change that would upset or bring attention to this place. And yet I think that's the most appropriate step that one could take. Which is not to say that the entire space here needs to be or should be like a, I don't know, what do you think about this, Carolyn? Like a dour reminder of things. Like I do think that this space has changed. It's not to deny the history that it has. And the history before it was a residential school should be commemorated here too. But I do think that there are some places here that should intentionally be chosen to commemorate what happened here.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like that's happened.
No. So the school closed in 1985, and that was the school down here. But this school that was up here closed in 1961, and the school was torn down in 1965. So these trees are probably been planted since then.
Yeah.
But my question is do we go over to Germany and expect to find like a park in the Holocaust Museum and where the gas chambers were?
Yeah, we don't.
And how weird would that be for us to feel if we walked into the place where they had the gas chambers and people walked to their death? Would you want to have a park there and celebrate German Day or whatever it is they do, right? Nationality Day there?
And that's an interesting piece about who has charge of these places, right? Germany lost the war, and so the monuments to their evil are preserved. Canada has had 50 or 60 years since this place was torn down to erase what happened here.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's happened. They've made it into this beautiful place where people come and walk their dogs and bring their kids and celebrate Canada Day and have music concerts here. And they've set it up on a place that is just as horrific, if not more horrific, than the Holocaust, because this happened. This was in over 100 years. The school was here in this space. As we came to the end of our journey through the park, we sat down and took a moment to reflect upon our thoughts and our feelings and our takeaways from the day.
Our concluding thoughts.
Our walk back, we talked a little bit about, what could we do that would never be adequate to talk about the history of this place, and also whether a place like this can exist as two things, right? As a place where people can walk their dog if that's what they need in a community, and as a place where you can connect to the history and remember the history and learn about the history of what happened here. I don't know. I think that that's possible. Carolyn was mentioning the residential school that became a hotel, and that got me thinking, right, I think that these spaces can be multiple things and can have complicated histories. We just need to tell that history, and it's not really being told here.
Yeah, rather moving ourselves out of the comfort zone of being okay that it's erased.
Yes.
But so, and I don't even think it's being okay with it being erased. They're not being told.
Yeah.
It's not being, the story's not been told. So how do we even give the opportunity of saying that it's okay to be erased when we're actually not telling it?
I'm also very curious, and you might have at one point seen them, but I'm curious as to what was in those plaques that was bad enough that they removed them. When some of them are still not very
They're not okay either.
not very sensitive and not very not intentional at all about talking about what happened here. So I'm curious. I'm curious as to what was there. I'm curious about what the plans are for the future for this space.
If there is.
Yeah, and I think that I feel like it would be far too easy for this, like the easy choice is for this space to never be commemorated in any meaningful way. We talked about how it seems at least one of the foundations has been dug up. There's no foundation of the school at all. The other buildings there is. I'm grateful that there are some pieces of this place that are still here, but nobody seems to ask any questions about why there are heritage foundations or a cemetery in this park.
In a park, yeah. What you, Dana?
Yeah, I guess for me, I feel like it's you sort of go through a bit of a roller coaster of emotions, of feeling like very sad and angry, and I think there's probably a level of what are you saying? White uncomfortableness.
White fragility. That
that you kind of have to reflect on, and why do you feel that way? And then I think the next thing is so what do we do with those feelings, and how do we move forward? Like, I think it would make sense to have something that would tell the story of this place, where we could get the authentic voices to come in. I think it could be, see, I'm thinking about money too. I think schools could invest by bringing their kids. I think there would be community support for something like that because of the educational value.
Right, so in some ways, like this place, which, as we've discussed a couple times today, is used for like gatherings and weddings and celebrations. This space, once the history of this is like, if it's ever clearly displayed here, I don't know that that's going to be, people are going to feel that that's appropriate. But that doesn't mean that this space will be unused. It will take on a different life at that point, right? Then students can come here and learn, and other people can come here and learn. But it is this question of whether people have the guts to change a place's identity in people's minds. I don't know.
And you could, even if you tried and said, I'm going to do this, the upheaval that would inflict on the community, that they would be so upset about.
So then do you try and say, okay, well, we'll do it slowly over the next 50 years? Or do you simply say, this is worth doing, we should do it now, we should do it intentionally, and that upheaval can be part of the message of people realizing, oh wow, I've been in this space hundreds or thousands of times and I've never considered what it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And remember that authentic learning is going to take time, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, and even if you were to like forcefully come in and change the space to retell the story of this place, wouldn't that then trigger other thoughts of, well, what other places am I in that I don't know the history of this place?
Yeah.
The story before this story.
Right. And I guess there's also an aspect to say, like, although you don't want to erase the history and forget what happened here, this is also still a beautiful territory.
Yeah.
And to be grateful for the land and to enjoy the land, I think can still happen even when you don't forget what happened.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think, this gathering space that we're in, as well as at the front by the gates, there's a carved some beautifully carved indigenous figures there, and some heritage that seems to be being identified and like connections being made with the community. But I'm also reminded of how some of these things can take on a token quality if it's like, okay, we've done our duty, we've put up an indigenous gathering place, and a reminder to maybe the community needs to be kind of continually added that we need to do more, we need to keep doing more, that this is steps on the path, but it's not the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to take this moment to thank both Dana and Dylan for coming out with me on this journey to St. Mary's Residential School out in Mission. Thank you for the conversations and the insight and the thoughtfulness of how we walk together in this journey of learning and unlearning the histories of this land. What are the untold histories of this place that we all live in? I'm inviting you to go find a place where you live, a place that you feel connected to, a place where you like to go and you enjoy that space. Go find the story that's not being told there. Go find out the history that's not been told there. And then think about how are we going to move forward in telling the true history and the true stories of this land and this territory that we are all on today. Thank you for your time and thank you for watching. Huitach.